Daniel Whitaker was the kind of man people whispered about without ever knowing the truth. On paper, he was one of New York's most successful investors, his name quietly tied to skyscrapers, companies, and charities across the country. But in person, he never let that wealth define him. While most millionaires flaunted their status, Daniel lived in a modest brownstone apartment tucked away on a quiet street in Brooklyn. He wore plain clothes, drove an old pickup truck, and preferred to shop at local markets where no one knew who he really was. It wasn't because he was ashamed of his success, it was because of the loneliness that came with it. Every woman he dated in the past seemed enchanted by his penthouse, his yacht, or his influence at black tie galas. They said the right words, but he could always see the flicker of calculation in their eyes, the hope of a life of luxury rather than love. One night, sitting alone by his window as the city lights twinkled below, Daniel whispered to himself, "Will I ever be loved for me, not for my money?" That question burned inside him more than any business failure ever could. So, he made a decision that would change his life. He would leave behind his world of private jets and luxury boardrooms and step into the life of an ordinary man. Not for a game, not for entertainment, but for a chance. Just one chance to be seen as Daniel. Not as Daniel Whitaker the millionaire. With quiet determination, he locked his high-rise office, left his credit cards in the safe, and slipped on his worn leather jacket. From that moment forward, the wealthy tycoon would disappear, and in his place would be a man searching for something money could never buy: true love. The first few weeks of Daniel's new life felt strangely liberating. For the first time in years, no one cared about his last name, his bank account, or the headlines he quietly controlled from behind the scenes. He woke up in his modest Brooklyn apartment, brewed his own coffee, and walked down bustling sidewalks where he blended in with the crowd instead of standing out. He found a job helping at a small hardware store, not because he needed the paycheck, but because he wanted to feel what it meant to earn a day's living in a simple, honest way. The store owner, Mr. Lopez, an elderly immigrant who treated Daniel like a son, never guessed he was talking to a man who could buy the entire block. But one chilly autumn morning, everything shifted. Daniel ducked into a little corner cafe he had passed dozens of times before, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered. The smell of fresh pastries and roasted coffee beans wrapped around him like a comforting blanket. He ordered a black coffee and sat at a wooden table near the window, quietly watching life pass on the street. That's when she walked in. Her name was Emily Carter, a young woman in her late 20s. With chestnut brown hair pulled into a loose bun and eyes that carried both kindness and weariness. She wore a thrift store coat, slightly frayed at the edges, and held a notebook tucked tightly under her arm. Daniel noticed the way she smiled warmly at the barista, how she apologized when she accidentally bumped someone's chair, how she laughed softly at her own clumsiness. She radiated a kind of authenticity Daniel hadn't seen in years. She sat at the table next to his, pulling out her notebook, pages filled with sketches and writing. Curiosity tugged at Daniel. She wasn't scrolling on her phone or posing for selfies. She was lost in her own world, drawing quietly, sipping her coffee like it was a rare luxury. Daniel cleared his throat. "You draw?" he asked gently. Emily looked up, startled, and smiled. "Trying to," she admitted, flipping the notebook so he could see a pencil sketch of a little girl holding balloons. "I want to be a children's book illustrator one day." Her honesty disarmed him. "That's beautiful," Daniel said sincerely. And for once he wasn't talking about her looks, but the dream she carried in her heart. Emily chuckled softly. "Beautiful, but not exactly practical. Rent doesn't get paid with doodles." She shrugged, trying to hide the weight in her words. Daniel felt something stir in his chest. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't performing. She was simply being real. He wanted to know more. As they talked, he learned Emily worked part-time at a community library, balancing bills while chasing her dream of publishing one children's book of her own. Unlike so many people he'd met, she didn't seem to measure worth by money. She measured it by kindness, by purpose, by small joys, like the coffee she held in her hand, or the stories she hoped to bring to life. For Daniel, the world outside that cafe seemed to blur. For the first time in years, he wasn't Daniel Whitaker, billionaire. He was just Daniel, a man sitting across from a woman whose laughter made the entire room feel lighter. When Emily finally gathered her things to leave, she smiled at him. "Nice talking to you, Daniel, was it?" He nodded, smiling back. "Yes, and you're Emily." As she walked out into the crisp autumn air, Daniel stayed frozen in his seat, his untouched coffee growing cold. Something inside him whispered, "This is it. This is the moment. Don't lose this." But another voice, quieter and more dangerous, reminded him, "She doesn't know who you really are. And one day she'll have to. Over the next few weeks, Daniel found himself drifting back to that little cafe more often than he'd admit. Always at the same time, Emily seemed to be there. At first, it felt like coincidence, but soon he realized he wasn't just coming for the coffee, he was coming for her. Emily was the kind of person who carried warmth with her, even on the coldest days. She told him about the library kids who loved story hour, about the old lady upstairs in her apartment building who baked cookies for everyone, about the way she sometimes stayed up all night sketching because inspiration refused to let her sleep. Daniel listened, not as a billionaire who could solve her struggles with a single check, but as a man who had forgotten what it felt like to really hear someone's heart. One afternoon, Emily invited him to the community library where she worked. The building was old, with creaking floors and shelves stacked with worn books, but the children there filled it with life. Daniel watched as Emily sat on a small rug, surrounded by wide-eyed kids. She read a story out loud, her voice animated, her hands moving as if she were painting the pictures in the air. The children laughed, gasped, and clapped, hanging on to every word. Daniel felt something shift inside him. Here was a woman who had so little in material wealth, yet gave so much of herself to others. She didn't need money to light up a room. She carried light within her. After story hour, Emily caught Daniel watching her. "What?" she teased, smiling shyly. He shook his head. "Nothing. I just think you're incredible." Her cheeks flushed slightly. "I'm just doing what I love." That night, as they walked home together, Daniel noticed Emily hugging her coat tighter against the chill. Without thinking, he shrugged off his hoodie and draped it over her shoulders. She protested, but he insisted. "I'll be fine. You need it more than I do." For Emily, it was a simple gesture, but for Daniel, it meant everything. He was used to buying extravagant gifts, sweeping people off their feet with money. But with Emily, the small gestures, listening, sharing warmth, walking her home, felt more powerful than any diamond ring he had ever given. Yet every step closer they grew, the secret weighed heavier. He wanted to tell her the truth, that he wasn't just Daniel, the hardware store worker who liked black coffee. He was Daniel Whitaker, heir to a billion-dollar empire. But each time the words rose to his lips, he saw her genuine smile, the way she looked at him with trust, and fear held him back. Because what if her smile changed when she knew? What if the love growing quietly between them wasn't strong enough to survive the truth? That night, Daniel lay awake in his modest apartment, staring at the cracked ceiling. He thought about Emily's laughter, her dreams, her kindness, and the secret that threatened to shatter it all. For the first time, he wondered if hiding who he really was not just protection, but also betrayal. The days turned into weeks, and Daniel's time with Emily became the part of his life he looked forward to most. They shared late-night walks, cheap pizza dinners, and endless conversations about books, dreams, and the little things that made life beautiful. Emily had a way of noticing the world, like how the first snowflakes seemed to glow under the streetlights, or how an old song playing in a diner could make strangers smile at each other. Daniel felt alive with her in a way he hadn't in years. For the first time, someone was seeing him. Not his wealth, not his reputation, not the empire he was supposed to run. Just him. But the truth loomed like a storm cloud over every laugh, every kiss, every whispered promise. Emily thought Daniel lived paycheck to paycheck, working long shifts at the hardware store just to get by. She often teased him gently about how little he treated himself. Once, she'd said with a smile, "When you finally save up, I'm taking you shopping for a real coat. That hoodie's on its last breath." Daniel laughed with her, but inside, guilt twisted. That coat had cost him nothing. In reality, he could buy 100 just like it, with the change from his luxury car's glove compartments. He wasn't broke, he wasn't ordinary, and every moment he let her believe otherwise, the fear of losing her grew sharper. One evening, Emily invited him over for dinner. Her apartment was tiny, but she had set the table with care. A simple pasta dish, candles flickering, soft music playing in the background. Daniel sat across from her, watching her laugh at one of his stories, and thought, "This is what I've been missing. This is love in its purest form." Yet when she asked casually, "So, how's work? Any chance of a promotion?" Daniel froze. He could feel the lie building in his throat. He forced a smile and mumbled something about long hours and minimum wage. But Emily's eyes softened with pity. "You deserve so much better," she said sincerely, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. That squeeze should have comforted him, but instead, it broke him a little. He wasn't lying to protect himself anymore. He was lying to her, to the very woman who trusted him without question. Later that night, as he walked home, the city lights blurred through his unshed tears. He wanted so badly to tell her the truth, but every scenario ended the same. Her face falling, her eyes filled with betrayal, her voice asking the question he dreaded most. So everything I loved about you, was it even real? Daniel had built empires, closed billion-dollar deals, and stood at the top of the world without blinking. But the thought of losing Emily's love, that terrified him more than anything. And so he decided he would hold on to the lie a little longer. Just a little, but deep down he knew every lie has an expiration date, and his was coming sooner than he thought. Emily had always admired how Daniel lived simply, never complaining, never chasing after material things. In a city where everyone seemed obsessed with money, status, and appearances, Daniel was different. He valued late-night walks more than fancy restaurants, conversations more than gifts. To her, that was beautiful. But lately, something didn't add up. One afternoon, they were walking downtown when Daniel instinctively stepped aside to let a sleek black car pass. Emily barely noticed, but Daniel froze for a moment, his eyes narrowing on the luxury brand's logo. It was the kind of car most people couldn't even name, let alone recognize instantly. She tilted her head and teased him. "Wow, you know your car's for a guy who doesn't even own one." Daniel laughed it off, scratching the back of his neck. "I read about them sometimes," but his voice had wavered, just slightly. Emily tucked the thought away, but it lingered. Another evening, Emily took Daniel grocery shopping. She reached for the store brand pasta, but Daniel automatically grabbed the imported Italian brand, twice the price. "Trust me, this one's better," he said with a smile. Emily raised an eyebrow. "How would you know? You always joke about living on ramen noodles." Daniel hesitated, then quickly covered it with a joke about watching too much Food Network. She laughed, but deep inside, she felt a flicker of unease. Then came the night at her apartment when her landlord stopped by, grumbling about overdue repairs. He mentioned the cost, muttering, "Not like anyone around here can afford it." Emily rolled her eyes, but Daniel's face darkened. Without thinking, he pulled out his phone, opening a payment app, his thumb hovering as if he could solve it in seconds. He caught himself just in time and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Emily noticed. That night, as Daniel kissed her goodbye, Emily lingered at the door long after he left. She couldn't shake the questions building in her mind. Who was Daniel, really? Why did he flinch at money talks? Why did he sometimes slip with knowledge that didn't match his supposed lifestyle? She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the man who held her hand on cold nights, who listened to her dreams as if they were his own, was exactly who he said he was. But her gut whispered otherwise. Lying in bed, Emily stared at the ceiling. She thought about how her last relationship ended, with dishonesty. She promised herself she'd never ignore red flags again, but this time her heart was involved, and that made everything harder. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel sat alone in his penthouse, its marble floors and city views, feeling more like a cage than a home. He poured himself a drink, staring at the skyline, haunted by Emily's laugh, her questions, her trust. He wanted to come clean, but the fear of losing her gnawed at him. For the first time, he realized that love built on lies was like glass. It sparkled in the light, but sooner or later, it was bound to shatter. Emily sat at her favorite cafe, fingers curled around a lukewarm cup of coffee, her mind miles away. The hum of chatter and the clinking of cups surrounded her, but she barely heard it. Every little moment with Daniel replayed in her head. The car, the pasta, the payment app. Tiny pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit. When Daniel walked in, his warm smile instantly softened her heart, just like it always did. He leaned down and kissed her cheek, sliding into the seat across from her. "Hey, you look like you're solving the mysteries of the universe." She forced a smile, but her eyes searched his face. "Maybe I am." Daniel chuckled, but a flicker of nervousness crossed his features. He picked up the menu, pretending to read, but Emily wasn't letting him off so easily this time. "Daniel," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" His eyes lifted, cautious. "Of course. Who are you, really?" Her voice trembled, but her gaze stayed steady. "Because sometimes it feels like the man I'm falling for isn't the whole story." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Daniel froze. He'd prepared for this moment in his head 100 times, but now that it was here, panic clawed at him. He set the menu down slowly, taking a deep breath. "Emily," he began, carefully choosing his words. "I'm me. I'm the guy who makes you laugh when you're stressed. The guy who walks you home when it's late. The guy who loves being around you more than anything." Her eyes glistened. "That's not what I'm asking, and you know it." She leaned forward, her voice breaking. "Why do you know things you shouldn't? Why do you slip up when money comes up? Why do I feel like there's a whole part of your life you're hiding from me?" Daniel swallowed hard, his chest tightening. He wanted to tell her everything, right there in that cafe. But fear gripped him. Fear of losing her trust, her love, her belief that he was different. He lowered his voice, almost pleading. "Please, Emily, trust me a little longer. I promise, I'll explain. Just not today." Her stomach twisted. She stared at him, torn between hope and heartbreak. Do you know what you're asking me for? You're asking me to ignore the same gut feeling that once cost me everything. Her voice cracked, a tear slipping down her cheek. I don't want to get hurt again, Daniel. I can't. Daniel's hands reached across the table, gently covering hers. You won't. Not with me. I swear. But Emily didn't pull her hand away, nor did she tighten her grip. She just let his hand sit there, her silence louder than any words. Later that night, walking home alone, Emily whispered to herself, if this love is real, then the truth has to come out soon. And back in his penthouse, Daniel pressed his forehead against the cold glass window, staring out at the city lights. Knowing the walls of his secret were closing in, he could feel it. Time was running out. It was a crisp Saturday morning, the kind Emily loved most. She convinced Daniel to join her at the local farmer's market, where the air smelled of fresh bread, roasted coffee, and autumn apples. Vendors greeted her warmly. She was a regular. But Daniel moved through the crowd with a quiet ease that made people glance twice. They stopped at a honey stand, and the older vendor began chatting about prices. Daniel, without missing a beat, mentioned how the same brand was sold at a gourmet shop in Manhattan for triple the cost. It's ridiculous, he said, shaking his head. Emily blinked, surprised. Wait, how would you know that? Daniel's jaw tightened. He forced a laugh, muttering something about reading it online, but his voice was too quick, too defensive. Emily's smile faltered, the old unease pricking at her again. As they walked, Emily tried to push it aside, but the day wasn't finished with them yet. At another stall, a well-dressed man in a tailored suit brushed past and stopped mid-step. He turned, eyes locking on Daniel. Mr. Whitmore? The man said, his voice startled but respectful. Daniel froze. For a second, his polished composure slipped, and Emily saw panic flash across his eyes. He quickly shook his head. Sorry, you must be mistaken, he replied curtly, tugging Emily's hand to move along. The man hesitated, frowning, but didn't press. Emily's heart pounded. Mr. Whitmore. She didn't say anything, but her mind was racing. Later, as they sat down at a small bench with paper cups of cider, she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper, who was he talking to, Daniel? Who's Mr. Whitmore? Daniel forced a chuckle, sipping his cider. I have no idea, Em. Probably just confused me with someone else. Happens all the time. But Emily didn't laugh. She studied him. The way his hands fidgeted, the way his eyes avoided hers. He was lying. She could feel it. The walk home was quiet, tension pressing down like a storm about to break. Emily's mind was a battlefield. Her heart wanted to trust him, but her instincts screamed otherwise. That evening, alone in her apartment, Emily Googled the name Whitmore. Pages of results popped up. Whitmore Industries, Whitmore family, Daniel Whitmore, heir to a billion-dollar empire. Her breath caught. She stared at the screen, her hands trembling. The face staring back at her in a photo, sharply dressed, confident, standing beside powerful executives, was unmistakably him, Daniel. She closed the laptop, her chest heaving. Tears welled in her eyes, not just from shock, but from betrayal. The man she had trusted, the man she thought was real, had been hiding the truth all along. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel sat in his penthouse again, his reflection staring back at him from the glass. He had built a wall of lies to protect the purity of their love, but now the cracks were too wide to hide. He whispered to himself, almost broken, she knows, she must know. Emily paced her small living room, her laptop still open on the table, Daniel's face staring back at her from glossy business articles. The man she knew, the one who laughed at bad rom-coms, who carried her grocery bags, who kissed her forehead when she was tired, was the same man the world knew as Daniel Whitmore, billionaire heir. Her chest felt tight. Betrayal burned through her veins, but beneath it was something worse, heartbreak. When Daniel knocked at her door later that night, carrying takeout and wearing that easy smile she had fallen for, Emily couldn't hold it in any longer. She opened the door, but didn't step aside. Who are you, Daniel? Her voice cracked, but her eyes blazed with hurt. Daniel froze, the bag of food dangling in his hand. Emily, what do you mean? Don't play dumb, she snapped, her voice shaking. She grabbed the laptop and shoved it toward him, the image of his face on the screen glowing between them. This is you, isn't it? Daniel Whitmore, the rich heir who's been lying to me from day one. The color drained from his face. He set the bag down slowly, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the truth. Emily, please, I was going to tell you. When? After a year? After you married me under a fake name? Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. You let me believe you were just normal, that we were equals. Do you know how humiliating this feels? Daniel stepped closer, desperate but careful not to touch her. I didn't lie because I wanted to hurt you. I lied because I wanted something real. All my life, people have treated me like a walking bank account. Women, friends, business partners, they wanted the Whitmore name, not me. You were different, Emily. You saw me, and I was terrified that if you knew the truth, you'd look at me like everyone else." Emily's sob caught in her throat. His words stabbed at her heart, but so did the memory of his lies. "You should have trusted me. If what we had was real, why didn't you believe I could love you for you?" Silence filled the room, broken only by Emily's ragged breathing. Daniel's eyes glistened, his usual calm completely shattered. "Because I didn't think I deserved that kind of love," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily turned away, hugging herself as if to hold her breaking heart together. She wanted to scream, to throw him out, to cling to him all at once, but all she could manage was a choked whisper. "You've broken something I don't know if I can fix." Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to reach for her, but the space between them felt like a canyon. He forced himself to leave, knowing she needed time. As the door closed behind him, Emily sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. For the first time since they met, both of them were left wondering if love could survive the truth, or if the lies had already destroyed it. The days after the confrontation stretched like an endless storm for Emily. Her phone buzzed with Daniel's messages, apologies, explanations, promises, but she couldn't bring herself to respond. Every time she saw his name flash across the screen, her heart twisted. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to remember the laughter, the late-night walks, the way he held her hand like she was his anchor. But every memory was tainted now, painted over with lies. At work, she forced smiles for co-workers. But at night, when she returned to her tiny apartment, the silence was unbearable. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the empty chair where Daniel used to sit, telling her stories. The chair stayed empty, and so did her chest. Meanwhile, Daniel was unraveling. The marble floors of his penthouse echoed with loneliness. The luxury cars, the private chefs, the suits worth more than most people's rent, all of it felt meaningless without her. He went to the office, but his focus was gone. Meetings blurred together. His board members whispered, wondering why their confident CEO seemed so distracted. He stopped attending galas, stopped entertaining investors, and instead drove past Emily's neighborhood more times than he could count, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He never stopped, never knocked. He just stared at the dim glow of her window and wished she knew how much he was suffering too. Emily, meanwhile, confided in her best friend Sarah. Sitting at their favorite coffee shop, Emily stirred her drink absent-mindedly. "He lied to me, Sarah, about everything. How do you forgive that?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "He didn't lie about how he felt about you. That much was real, wasn't it?" Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, but the truth slipped in like a crack of light through a closed door. Daniel had been honest in the way he looked at her, the way he listened, the way he cared, but the fear of being deceived again clung to her like a shadow. One evening, Emily returned home to find a small envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a handwritten letter in Daniel's messy scrawl, raw, unpolished, nothing like the polished businessman the world knew. "Emily, I lied about who I was, but I never lied about what you mean to me. If I could trade every dollar in my account for one more chance to earn your trust, I would. I don't expect you to forgive me now. I just need you to know that the man you fell in love with wasn't a mask. That was me, stripped of all the noise, and I'll keep fighting for you, even if it takes forever." Emily sat on her couch, tears blurring the ink. For the first time since the truth came out, she realized the war wasn't just between her and Daniel. It was inside her, between love and fear, between betrayal and forgiveness, and somewhere deep in her heart she knew the story between them wasn't finished yet. It was a Saturday evening when Emily finally agreed to meet Daniel. After weeks of silence and sleepless nights, she needed answers, not through letters, not through messages, but face to face. They chose a quiet park, the kind with worn benches and tall oak trees that swayed gently in the breeze. Daniel arrived first. For once, he wasn't wearing his tailored suits or polished shoes. He came in jeans and a plain white shirt, his hair slightly tousled, his eyes heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. He looked less like a billionaire CEO and more like the man Emily had fallen in love with, the one who carried groceries, who stayed up late just to hear her laugh. Emily approached slowly, her arms crossed tightly as if shielding her heart. Daniel stood, his breath catching at the sight of her. "Emily," he began, his voice unsteady. She cut him off. "I don't need another apology, Daniel. I need the truth, all of it." And so he gave it. He told her about the empire he had inherited, the walls of wealth that had always kept people at arm's length. He admitted how terrified he was that if she knew who he really was, she would see only the dollar signs and not the man. His voice cracked as he said, "With you, I just wanted to be seen, just Daniel, not the billionaire, Not the headline, just me. Emily listened, her chest tight. The anger she had carried was still there, but beneath it was something deeper, understanding. She thought about the way he looked at her when she wasn't watching, the way he remembered little details about her dreams, the way he put her before himself in 100 small ways. Finally, she spoke. You broke my trust, and that's not something that heals overnight. Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. I know, but I'll spend the rest of my life proving that my love for you has nothing to do with money, if you let me. There was a long silence. Emily looked down at her hands and back up into his eyes. And for the first time since the lies unraveled, she didn't see a stranger. She saw the man who walked her home in the rain, who laughed with her over burned pancakes, who held her hand as if it was the most precious thing in the world. Her voice trembled as she whispered, I don't want your money, Daniel. I never did. I just wanted you. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, his relief so raw it made her chest ache. Slowly, cautiously, Emily stepped forward, and when his arms wrapped around her, it wasn't the embrace of a billionaire. It was the embrace of a man who had finally been set free. The park lights flickered on as the sun dipped below the horizon. Around them, life carried on. Children laughing, couples strolling, the world moving forward. But in that moment, for Daniel and Emily, time stood still. Their love, tested and scarred, had survived the storm, not because of wealth, not because of appearances, but because at its core, it was real. And for the first time, both of them believed it could last forever. This story teaches us that a person's true worth is not measured by wealth, status, or fame, but by their character, kindness, and willingness to help others. Even the smallest act of help can change someone's life, and a smile or a word of encouragement can become a light in someone's darkest moment. The real rich are not those who collect money, but those who spend from what they have to win hearts. Always remember, one good deed, one prayer, and one smile can raise you to the highest rank of humanity.